Jordan White spilled more beans regarding the Krakoan X-Men era, and I think Doc and I have probably made our point regarding Jordan White and the Legion of Doofuses and the mismanagement of X-Men during Jordan White's tenure. So we're going to concentrate more on the storytelling aspects and things that we are excited for and the way that they changed along the way. Because we used to talk about the Krakoan era at the very beginning, Doc, with a lot of excitement. There was a lot of mysteries introduced, a lot of things that appeared were enormous on the horizon, and a lot of them didn't end up paying off in the end.
Virtually nothing that was set up, early on by Jonathan Hickman was really paid off much at all. They never got around to a lot of the stuff with Moira and her lives. She completely abandons her goal. They never got around to a lot of the AI, phalanx, universal level stuff that they were hinting at early on as well. Never even bothered to go anywhere with that. All those blue, genetically modified human AI hybrid things, all those things from House and Powers, nope, never even got anywhere near that. So yeah, it seems like a lot of never paying shit off for us.
Absolutely. So let's go into some of the questions and the way that Jordan White, the group editor during the Krakoan era, answered these. Way back in House of X, we learned Xavier overwrote his own mind with the backup twice. What's the deal with that? This is what Jordan said. Jonathan Hickman was creating this idea of resurrection and how it works, what the backups are and how that happens. This idea that we believe there are some characters still, but also they're missing their deaths and the part between the last time they were backed up. It was very interesting and weird and creepy. And then the possibility became that, well, if they have all these backups, you could bring someone back from an earlier backup. As you know, Xavier is the only one who's known about it. So the idea that he backed himself up from an earlier versions on purpose is kind of creepy and weird. And it does kind of invite you to go, why? And we did not answer that question. And that was one of the more interesting things in there when they were explaining the backups and resurrection and the experiments that Charles Xavier was doing on himself. You're like, why was he doing this? My assumption was that someone was going to go evil and eventually they were going to resurrect them, then way back them up or something like that. Because remember, they had like backups all over the world. They had backups on Krakoa. They had like a secret island. I think they had backups in 4 different places. And it seemed like a lot of them had different versions of all these different mutants throughout Krakoa.
It looks like he was planning to do something where the wrong Rev version of a character gets put back in place. Like, hey, they managed to cure Sabretooth and he's going good and everything's great. And then he died on a mission and they go to bring him back and they think they bring the real one back, but it's actually one of the earlier pre-cured Sabretooths. And they're not exactly sure how they cured him the first time. So it's impossible to replicate. And now he's suddenly a traitor or something like that.
I thought it was going to be much more sinister, where Professor X was going to have maybe turn Cyclops or manipulate somebody, have them do something bad, and then revert to something before he ever even started that stuff so he could act like he didn't do anything.
There's a lot of different ways that you could go with that story. Even like the Vulcan one, where there was multiple instances of him that were accidentally created because the one that they thought died in the black hole. So they resurrected him, but it turns out he wasn't actually dead. They had a plan for that too. But this was one of the multiple ways that resurrection could go bad. It seems like they were really foreshadowing that. And then they promptly do fucking nothing with it.
Next up, they said, will we ever find out about the newly formed AI and Doug in the world at the end of giant-sized X-Men Storm? Was that meant to be followed up on? This is what Jordan White said. Jonathan has also talked about this one specifically because he has revealed that this was something he kind of came up with at the last minute because he intended for there to be a very different outcome to this story. His intention when we started those giant-sized books was to have Storm be pregnant and have Black Panther's child. So this was a pivot. This was him going, all right, well, we can't do that. So instead, we're going to do this. And it seemed like cool stuff. It just ended up never going anywhere. That's kind of weird. I don't think they really should have had Storm have Black Panther's baby. So maybe it was a good pivot. Although I don't remember thinking that the AI Doug thing was interesting or important.
Well, there was not much in any of those giant-sized issues that were very good or interesting or shit that I cared about having them really follow up on. The idea of having the Storm pregnant with Black Panther's baby thing, I get where he's saying that, because he wanted to make a callback. But I feel like Jonathan Hickman, either Jordan White is lying about where they were planning to go with this, or Jonathan Hickman was fucking dumb, because Storm and Black Panther and their marriage and everything, that had been over for years at this point.
The only thing that really appeared to be interesting during those giant-sized X-Men books was the Magneto book. And apparently that was also supposed to be something else. The key from giant-sized X-Men Magneto was followed up on just recently in Resurrection of Magneto. But even that was Al Ewing kind of making something out of what he had at hand, because that wasn't the intention. I mean, I think the intention was the key had something to do with the entity at the end of giant-sized X-Men Storm. But again, that never became a thing. At one point, an idea was floated that involved the X-Men using the world as a means to battle the Children of the Vault, because they both have similar time warping capabilities. And I remember that was like the one big thing that seemed to come out of it was that key that Magneto put into his belt after I think he gives that island to Emma. But that didn't really go anywhere. I didn't notice the key in Resurrection Magneto. I said, that doesn't make any sense.
Like literally none of the things that was setting up ever came to any amount of fruition. You know, that key probably would have been the key to access the world.
I remember the giant-sized X-Men books coming out and think, well, okay, these might be important, but I had absolutely forgotten that they ever even existed until I read this.
I forgot that they existed too, because absolutely nothing that occurred in them was consequential whatsoever.
I remember the Nightcrawler book ended up not even really being about him.
No, it really wasn't. It was, well, wasn't that the one where he randomly saw Doug talking to Warlock because everybody thinks Warlock's dead? And I felt like that was going to lead to something, because they made a big deal about the fact that you didn't see what you thought you saw. This is what I got to say to the X office. You sold us I think they were $5 or $6 one shots that you claimed were absolutely super fucking important. Absolutely nothing of consequence occurred in any of them, because you didn't follow up on a fucking thing. Jordan, Jonathan, Vita, Tinny, and all the rest of you incompetent fucking buffoons. You wonder why we all walked away. You fleeced us out of 30 fucking bucks for useless birdcage liner. It felt like the entire reason that Storm one existed is because Jonathan Hickman and Russell Dauterman needed to outdo Grant Morrison and Frank Quitely by doing literally the exact same issue as the Nuff Said Month issue of New X-Men.
Yeah, so it was nice to remember that one. I forgot those existed. Another thing that was asked, one thing that has been eating away at me ever since the launch of the current era, is what were the redacted portions of Moira's journal all the way back in Powers of 10, number 6. This is what Jordan said. It was just cool, dude. It was both cool and a way to go, guess what? You're not getting the whole story, so we can add more to it later. And I remember all the redacted portions of everything being interesting. I was like, man, I wonder what we're supposed to learn along the way. And I guess we did sort of learn that Moira was intentionally hiding information from Charles, and that's why she didn't want like the telepaths and stuff being resurrected, or people that could see the future and all that kind of stuff. And she was intentionally withholding information, but it turns out that those really weren't important. I think they were just there, I guess, to get you interested.
They were exemplary of the fact that there was mysteries rather than the actual mystery that they're introducing there, I guess. I feel like Krakoa and everything that Hickman set up is the comic book of equivalent of Nothing Fucking Matters. I think in like the first couple of seasons of Lost and a lot of other J.J. Abrams shows, they introduce all these mysteries, and then 90% of them never really get addressed because they have no plan. You know, it's just, hey, we're going to introduce this thing and we like it and it's cool. But a lot of them, they're just like, you know what? Fuck it. We're just not even going to bother. Even though that's something that people were really hyped about.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the intrigue and the mystery and everything. Next up, Jonathan shared that Moira was not meant to be the Krakoan era's main villain. No one would have seen the main villain coming. This is what Jordan said. I'm not going to reveal who was going to be the villain. It's a character that readers would be extremely surprised would become the villain because you really would not have expected it. But we're not at the place where I think it's appropriate to talk about that yet for a few reasons. One of which is I believe strongly that it would not have been a good idea to continue with the plan as it was very first conceived. And I know saying that is just going to make people desperately want to hear it. But I don't think that now is the time to talk about it. This is like a 20 years from now kind of thing. I would have gone with the original plan no matter what it was, because it never made sense that Moira ended up being the villain. When she skinned Banshee, like it was so out of character, it didn't even make sense. It didn't make sense for the progression and the character arc of Moira to eventually want to kill all the mutants because she herself is a mutant. And as soon as she died, everything was going to be reset anyway.
Exactly. Here's the thing. It seems like every time Jordan here had an opportunity to go through with a plan or abandon it and go in a different direction, he picked the worst possible outcome. I am the first one to go with the rule of cool, but that's for design and visuals. Very, very rarely is it for plot progression or reveals. If you'd use the rule of cool for that, it's going to end up blowing up in your face because it will make absolutely no fucking sense, like turning Moira into a Terminator. It just ends up as underwhelming. While I understand Jonathan Hickman doesn't exactly human very well, and his ability to characterize characters is abysmal, because I'm pretty sure he's a robot from the future himself, you still have to go with his plot ideas. Sorry, we're paying for his plot ideas, not some doofus with a terrible mustache.
So who could have been the villain? I would imagine Doug would have been the prime candidate, because remember, he was doing something weird on the island with Charles, where he was connecting with the island, but he wasn't telling him about it.
Honestly, I think it was possibly Doug and Warlock in conjunction. Warlock would have ended up being infected by his father, and maybe he was a mutant technarchy, which meant he was an independent being that exists within a race that is nothing but a collective intelligence. He might have kind of come into the hive mind and ended up influencing Doug. It would have brought everything to the way future. It would have attached everything to the AI versus human or versus mutant thing. It would have made sense to connect to the whole phalanx thing. It would have made sense for Doug, since he's not telling Xavier what's going on, but he's communicating secretly with Krakoa. It would have made sense with that giant-sized issue where everybody thought Warlock's dead. Doug would have been the perfect choice. Nobody takes Doug Ramsey seriously as an actual threat, either for you or against you.
Well, and we also know that Krakoa was doing something to the mutants over time. That was spelled out, I believe, in House of X Powers of 10 as well. Probably should have gone with the original plan. We did end up getting the Hellfire Gala, Doc, and I don't think the Hellfire Gala in itself is a successful concept. The first time they did it, it was a bunch of tied in, I guess it was like a mini event, and there was nothing really cool about it except for one scene, and Jordan White talks about that. What did Reed Richards whisper to Charles Xavier at the first Hellfire Gala? Jordan states, "Oh, great question. I don't know. Something threatening. We haven't revealed it. Obviously, my guess would be something to do with Reed saying, 'Did you really think I just sit here and let you steal something from my mind?' Maybe when we put that in, Jerry Duggan was thinking Reed already had the knowledge back, or maybe it was something about Franklin." I was wanting the Fantastic Four to absolutely annihilate Charles Xavier for trying to manipulate Franklin.
They were obviously setting something big up, because it was within the first 6 months of the Krakoan era that they did that Fantastic Four X-Men crossover. Chip Zdarsky, you have the Dodsons that you're paying. Now we understand that as soon as Dan Slott got the gig on Fantastic Four, he basically put the kibosh to anything that was planned there, because he wanted to do whatever retarded fat guy thing he wanted to do. That being said, they were obviously planning to do something somewhere, and for the love of fucking God, pay off a goddamn mystery.
That's like one of the very first instances where you're like, it feels like the X-Men might be bad guys here, but when I see that, I know they're the bad guys. They're doing something evil.
You're not even just foreshadowing. You're straight up screaming, "We're going to do something with this." And then you promptly do fucking nothing with it.
Yeah, so that was disappointing, because Hellfire Gala just never really worked for me. I don't care about people being in dresses and guys being in drag and all that kind of stuff. But there were a couple of moments, there was that, and then there was that time where it seemed like Moira was going to skin MJ.
Everyone said, if you fucking skin MJ to have Moira, wear her as a skin suit. We're done. Like, done. That was the collective response from even the lunatic, the 12 psychos on Twitter and the Libidaqua alphabet mafia. Even they were like, yeah, don't fucking do that shit.
So most of this interview is about stuff that happened or didn't happen, things that were introduced. There was a final question or kind of at the end about stuff that never actually happened. And there's a couple of answers I want to go in on this one. They asked, were there any pitches that came your way during the Krakoa era that you would have liked to see come to fruition? Jordan says, I'll say Vita Ayala had a pitch for a New Mutants book for Fall of X that I think would have been really great, and I really wanted to see it happen. I'm sad that it didn't happen. I don't want you to bother Vita, but if you're at a convention, maybe you could say, hey, what was your Fall of X book you were going to do that didn't get to happen? Why would he even be taking pitches from Vita at that point? She had that Storm book in X of Swords that wasn't very good, that people claim was the greatest Storm story of all times. It wasn't. She had the Children of the Atom miniseries that didn't sell. She had her New Mutants book, which didn't sell and then got replaced by, oh man, who did Lethal Legion?
Charlie Jane Anders.
Got replaced by Charlie Jane Anders. Like, I don't understand why they were even taking pitches from Vita at that point.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that Jordan White actually did want to greenlight all of these, but I'm pretty sure even the sales department were like, no, you're not greenlighting this retarded fucking idea. Because whatever idea it was, I don't know what it was. I don't care what it was. I guarantee it was probably the most retarded shit you've ever heard.
There was a better idea that he had an answer for. He said, X-Dez of Wolverine, that name came from a pitch that I think was from Jonathan going, hey, we should do a story like this. But again, it morphed into something completely different. That initial story was the 10 deaths of Wolverine being the 10 secret kill missions that he was sent on that he doesn't know about because he was killed and resurrected every time. That would have been a really fun story. But again, it never fit with what we were doing at the time. Jonathan wasn't going to write it. He thought Ben should do this story. But yeah, it just never fit with the plans. And that sounds like a pretty fucking cool story, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds significantly cooler than what we actually got in the book.
That was Phalanx Wolverine going to kill his family, right?
Yeah, and it was just time travel Wolverine bullshit that is somehow, some way, kind of, sort of loosely connected to that Moira and Logan were the only two mutants left in that space garden thing with the blue people. And even then, it basically changed that entire scene.
And you've got like Phalanx Wolverine that's going to the past and trying to kill Wolverine in his past lives. And
exactly.
The lady holding the baby with the umbilical cord firing a shotgun.
Uh-huh.
One of the dumbest moments in comic book history. Yeah, I would have preferred the secret missions that Charles had sent Logan on, and then he had to resurrect him every time and then wipe out his memory of knowing about that, because that's always been a part of Wolverine's story, is people making him do evil things and manipulating him and then taking away all of his memories and his agency and his own activities. And it would have been almost full circle for the character. Although it certainly would have painted Charles Xavier in a much more villainous light early on. But he just sold out all the X-Men and the mutants, in Fall of X anyway. So it's not like we didn't see him get to become the worst guy in the X-Men history again.
All of this is just really, really tedious, and all of the other potential outcomes for it are significantly more fun. Even his idea for the last Hellfire Gala, because he really, really wanted to make it a crossover again. Guess what, Jordan? The reason why you couldn't get it made into a crossover again, and the last two times it just had to basically be a one shot, is because the first time you did it, it was so abysmally bad. There's no way that marketing was ever going to let you do it again as a crossover.
Yeah, but Eminem made a cameo in the first one.
I know, right? And Kevin Feige made a cameo in fucking one of them. Or was it Pete Davidson?
I don't remember all of them.
I don't. It was pick your celebutard and shove them into the comic. And guess what? Exactly zero comic fans give a fuck about TMZ bullshit. You burned up all the possibility of doing this as a crossover Because you know what? The crossover you actually propose in this version of the Hellfire Gala would have been not terribly bad.
Well, Doc, I do want to say thank you very much. I enjoyed going back and remembering some of the things that I'd forgotten or things that seemed important at the time, but ended up not really being important, and some of the ideas that never really came to fruition. This ended up being like a 40-plus minute conversation that's available right now on Think Critical Patreon. If you want the full Doc experience talking about this as well as reviewing Spider-Gwen the Ghost Spider, you got to go to the Patreon. There's a link to that in the video description.